Good evening. I call the special meeting of the Ames City Council for Tuesday, February 18th to order. Welcome, everybody. And this is a workshop tonight, and we're going to start with Downtown Ames, a guiding vision for the future. And we'll turn it over to Travis, Sam, and Andrew. Welcome.
Great. Well, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Hala, members of council, members of city staff, and members of the Ames community. My name is Travis Tolliver. I serve as the executive director for Ames Main Street, and on behalf of our organization's board of directors, it is an honor to present to you Downtown Ames, a guiding vision for the future, a document that represents years of dedicated hard work and public engagement, and a shared commitment to ensure that Downtown Ames continues to thrive as the heart of our community. This vision is more than just a proposal. It is a roadmap for the future of Downtown Ames, one that builds upon the rich history while positioning it for continued growth, innovation, and prosperity. Through extensive public input, collaboration with stakeholders, and expertise from our partners at Bolton and Mink, we have developed a framework that will enhance the vibrancy, accessibility, and economic vitality of our downtown district. As a place to live, work, shop, and gather, Downtown Ames plays a vital role in shaping the identity and economic success of our city. With strategic improvements and intentional investments, we have the opportunity to position Downtown Ames as the premier destination in central Iowa and the greater region, a place where businesses flourish, community connections are strengthened, and visitors are drawn to experience everything our city has to offer. Now, we recognize that with every bold vision, there are concerns, challenges, and even pushback from members of our community. Change is never easy, and meaningful progress often comes with difficult conversations. However, I encourage all of us to keep our eyes focused on the ability to reimagine the future of Downtown Ames in a way that benefits our entire community. By working together with determination and openness, we can ensure that this vision becomes a reality. Tonight, we are excited to share this document with you and look forward to discussing how we can work together to bring it to life. I want to thank you for your time, your leadership, and your unwavering support of this important initiative. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Sam Stagg to say a few words as the Ames Main Street lead for this project. And after him, Andrew Dresner from Bolton and Mink will begin our presentation. Sam.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate it. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I appreciate your time tonight. Just a few comments before I turn it over to Andrew. So this process started just under 5 years ago with Ames Main Street conducting a handful of meetings and focus groups. At that time, we didn't realize that it would turn into such a successful effort, but we had hope, right? And since then, we've continued this effort with community and focus group meetings, stakeholder and steering committee meetings, community surveys, social media and digital outreach efforts, as well as public open houses. Through those initiatives, we have cultivated a shared vision that embraces the rich history of downtown Ames while positioning it for future growth, innovation, and community and visitor engagement. A few thank yous here before I turn it over to Andrew. We just want to express our just a great sense of appreciation and gratitude toward Mr. Mayor, members on the council, and City of Ames staff for all the help and effort that you've given throughout this process. Specifically regarding the staff, they helped a lot with the proposal and the logistics, and Mr. Mayor had his hand in that as well. That's been very helpful in our process here, but also attending a lot of the events that we've held as well. So thank you for that. Also like to thank the collaboration and contributions of Dan Culhane and his team with the Ames Alliance, the Chamber of Commerce, as well as Ames Main Street. That's been unwavering and very supportive. Also the strong support and contribution of Ames Alliance Board and the Ames Chamber of Commerce Board. This project was also made possible by the collective effort of the City of Ames, Discover Ames, and many private organizations and companies who've contributed financially to the design fees for Bolton and Mink and their team to help us with this process. And lastly, this initiative would not have been made possible without the collaboration of so many individuals, both public and private, in terms of companies as well, who support this vision. So I appreciate everyone's collaborative effort. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew and he can present the plan for us. I'm sorry, the guiding vision.
Thank you very much. I think I got to go over here to get the slides going, if I'm not mistaken. Can you see anything? Yeah. Okay, great.
All right. Thank you very much, Travis, and thank you, Sam, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I can't help but to notice the two big photographs next to the slide, and I think it's interesting because those photographs represent they sort of have a view of Ames as a growing, robust, outward growing city, which it is and will continue to be. This effort that we've collaborated with Main Street and downtown on is really about looking inward at the center of the city, not about growing outward, which is a very efficient way to grow. It provides a set of choices that you cannot get in any other type of development. It's efficient because infrastructure is already there. And it uses land very wisely. So that's sort of one of the underpinnings of this entire effort. Okay. So I believe you received this document by email. It's a nice, big, hefty plan, guiding plan for downtown. It consists of an executive summary, some thorough, and hopefully you find thorough analysis, some findings, a vision statement with some big ideas behind it, a series of frameworks, which are basically the functional layers of the city, recommendations for 4 focus areas, and then an implementation chapter.
Andrew, just as a point of clarification,
Yes.
is that this is available on the city's website. It's underneath the mayor and council under meetings. So actually, we didn't get it by email. We downloaded it like everybody else could on Friday. So the point is that everyone has joint access to it. If someone's wondering how can I get access to it, it's online right now. If they want to go ahead and grab it if they don't want. But anyway,
Great.
go ahead.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank you. And I encourage everyone to take a look at it. Here it is, 55 pages, 5 chapters, 4 big ideas, and we'll go through that all today. So projects like this are an iterative process. So we go through discovery and analysis. We've tested ideas throughout the process, and then we prioritize and provide implementation steps. Documents like this should be revisited every 10 years or so because we live in a world of dynamic markets, public input changes, your population changes, and new challenges emerge. So I encourage you to do this again in 10 years. The input from this project, as Sam and Travis alluded to, came from the steering committee, from yourselves, and from a public survey. And that was the sort of the soft input in a sense. The hard input comes from the technical analysis that we performed as urban planners and designers. So a little bit about the planning context. So this work addresses the area between Grand and Duff, north of the tracks to 6th or 7th Street, okay? We don't address issues south of the tracks down to Lincoln Way. Issues in that area are addressed in the Lincoln Way development plan, which the city adopted a couple of years ago. So downtown sits in a pretty dynamic area. There's a lot going on around the area, not just the Lincoln Way corridor plan, but it's taken in the walk, roll, and bike plan, which is one of the city's systems plans. The aquatic center is planned and going up to the southwest of downtown. Schenker Plaza is underway. And of course, the historic downtown is not fully defined, but Main Street is largely defined by a historic district. And that last point's important because the designation of that historic district really kept Main Street on its feet and got it up and rolling. This plan sort of launches from there and says, okay, what more can downtown do to bolster Main Street and help downtown grow? The plan also sits within the policy context of the comprehensive plan, the Ames Plan 2040, which defines downtown as a pretty aggressive growth area. Downtown's not downtown, Ames is one of these interesting cities where it sort of has two centers. You have the campus and you have downtown. And unlike the other state college in Iowa, they're not next to each other. They're separate. They're not far, mind you. They're not far at all. They are separated by a river and a ravine. But the city is sort of has these two centers to it. And in some ways, that's a nice advantage because it allows these two centers to establish two different identities. And for a city this size, two is better than one. So that's one of the interesting components, I think, of the downtown. So there are a series of major takeaways that we bring to the surface after going through the analysis, both the hard analysis and the soft analysis. First of all, downtown has all the makings of being a great neighborhood, with the exception of the housing. And so it's the reverse of a lot of neighborhoods which need the support elements. They have the housing, they need the support elements. So it's sort of just the opposite. Yeah, there's a little bit of housing within downtown, but not much really at all. It's got a great grocery store. I stopped in today. How many downtowns have a great grocery store? It's got access to actually two grocery stores. That's right. Yep. So it's got a lot of those elements. It doesn't have the housing. And we believe that we know there's a national shortage of housing, there's a state shortage of housing, and there's a local shortage of housing. So it seems to be a reasonable place for housing growth, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Downtown is underbuilt, but land is not plentiful. So it's a constrained number of acres. We say it's underbuilt because there is a lot of surface parking, which is not the highest and best use of land. And the zoning envelope is actually quite large for downtown, and you're not close to filling that zoning envelope. We've learned that events and programming are very, very popular downtown. People like to come downtown. It's a special place. It's a place to celebrate identity, a place to explore different events, and they're popular. We also learned that streets are really just streets, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future, in a couple minutes, but streets can be so much more, but they're really acting, for the most part, just as streets now. The retailers are local and unique. People love that. That's a super important quality of downtown. That's the sort of thing that Duff Avenue does not have south of downtown, et cetera. We also learned that the entry to downtown from the south in particular is a little uncomfortable. You come off of Lincoln Way, you cross the tracks, and it's a little disconcerting where to go if you're looking to park. So that entry experience is a little uncomfortable. And that's really important because you lose customers very quickly, with an uncomfortable experience. And then finally, downtown surprisingly doesn't have really much of a hotel or hospitality industry within it, which is also a little unusual for a downtown. You usually would see, I know you used to have one hotel downtown, but you usually would see one or two at least hotels downtown to support that hospitality industry. So those are some of the big takeaways. So the vision statement is up on the board here. I won't read it through, but it is about, I think Travis actually captured it really well in his statements about what downtown can become, not just for downtown, but for the entire community of Ames in the future. A walkable community, a dynamic community, strong economics, a place that celebrates the historic fabric of downtown, but also brings in new innovative ideas into downtown. So this is an aspiring vision, and hopefully this plan gives the physical framework to get there. This is the basic outline of the plan, and I'll go into the 4 big ideas that really guide it. So first of all, to build a robust and a complete downtown neighborhood. So what that means is, and the goals within the plan are to attract and establish more residents and overnight visitors, and to create an 18-hour downtown, a place that is lively from morning until evening, and a little bit into the evening, let's just say. Maybe not a 24-hour city, but an 18-hour city. So that means you can see how that is closely related to the idea of a hotel and the hospitality industry. Secondly, streets as spaces. So I mentioned earlier that streets are just streets. One of the big ideas here is that we think of streets as spaces. Chances are you're not going to create any new parks within downtown. So in order to create the public amenities, the recreation, the event amenities, you have to start thinking about using your streets as those places. That doesn't mean they don't also carry vehicles. They still do, but they are designed and can become more flexible. I'll talk a little bit about more about that in the plan as well. And then secondly, improving the perimeter and the entrances to downtown. That speaks to the discomfort of entering downtown. Third big idea is to improve connections to ISU. We've heard that many students will come to Ames for 4 years and not step foot in downtown. That's a huge missing opportunity. So this plan tries to create more off-campus opportunities for students, more off-campus experiences for them to enjoy while they're here in Ames as a student. It also encourages downtown to be used by the university as a classroom and a laboratory. So it's a place you can do human study in downtown. You can have a satellite spaces, or the university can have satellite spaces in town. The plan doesn't necessarily talk about the university having a big real estate footprint or a real estate footprint in downtown. That's not the goal, but the goal is rather to think of downtown as a place for teaching, a place for learning. And then finally, an entrepreneurial downtown. So the plan seeks to ensure that there's low-cost space for aspiring entrepreneurs. The plan seeks to foster the arts, innovation, and entertainment. So these are the four big ideas for downtown. So this is an overall image that you'll see. There's many times in the plan that shows the downtown in its, let's say it's 20-year state and 20 years from here. So existing buildings are generally in white or gray, and new construction or opportunities for new construction are shown generally in orange. So north is up, east is, the university is off to the left, and you can see the power plant, the big purple building on the right. So the purple buildings here are all existing, and those are we'll call them community anchors or landmarks. So City Hall, the building we're in now, the library, the power plant, not because we go there daily, but because it is the city's skyscraper and it sort of acts as a landmark. So this plan, in total, the orange, generally speaking, the orange buildings here, we think that downtown can accommodate somewhere in the range of 800 to 1,000 new housing units, okay, within the downtown. This plan also accommodates a modest amount of new commercial within the downtown, particularly along Duff Avenue and along Main Street. Okay, so I'll get into some of those details. So there are four basic focus areas in the plan, and we'll just start with, let me back up. One focuses on Main Street. The other focuses on a connection between Schenker Plaza and Lincoln Way developments. The third is the east edge of downtown, and the fourth is the west edge of downtown. I'll go through those briefly here, and then we can open up for discussion and questions. So geographically, you can see them here. Main Street goes east and west. That's A in green. The Burnett or Schenker to Lincoln Way is shown in yellow. And then you have the east edge and the west edge. You see them again here. Now, each of these four focus areas in the plan have an associated four, we'll just call them opportunities, four opportunities. So, and then actually we go one level deeper with yet more granularity. But in general, we have four focus areas and within them four opportunities. And I'll speak to just some of them in this the next couple moments. So the first is about Main Street activation. Now I want to say that Main Street is strong. It's doing well. So this plan is not about massive changes to Main Street. Certainly the eastern, we'll say 3 blocks, I think, are extremely strong, doing great. One of our important evaluations, however, of Main Street is that even though it's doing well, it's one of those streets that's mostly for cars. You maximize the parking and you have 2 drive lanes in each direction. So the drawing on the image in the upper right tells us that when you look at a simple block in Main Street, in yellow is the pedestrian space. And what's not yellow is vehicle space, either parking or drive lanes. Pedestrian space is about 24-25% of the space, okay? And it gives you the sidewalk that you see in the lower left, which is 12 or 15 feet wide, which is the absolute, what I would say, minimum for a downtown, because it really simply provides space for people to walk past each other. It barely provides space for tables, for outdoor dining, which is very common in downtowns. You see that all over. I think one restaurant, or maybe 2 of them, might have small 2-tops out front, but it's pretty narrow. So what this plan talks about in many different ways is thinking about this space, and other streets as spaces. Okay, so the image in the bottom right, the drawing in the bottom right, talks about using the parking areas for dining patios, possibly for places to display product, for other as parklets, etc. So again, this idea of thinking of streets as spaces. When we start to do those things, now that whole area is more of a space. This focus area also talks about the other side of Main Street. I hesitate to call it the backside, but it's kind of what it is. So it's the parking area south of Main Street. So when we think about that entry experience into downtown, it's not just crossing the tracks and knowing where to park. It's going from your car to Main Street, or from your car up to 5th Street, which is the walking experience. So this plan provides recommendations that improve that walking experience by widening the sidewalk on the south side of the buildings, by providing shared dumpsters or gang dumpsters so that it's a little more organized, by activating the back sides of the buildings, you can see here, with some dining patios, etc. So when you get out of for those who are arriving by car, and by the way, it's important to note, not everyone arrives by car. Lots of people walk, lots of people bike, lots of people take transit. But for those who are arriving by car from the south and coming to these parking lots, this provides a much more comfortable experience to move from those lots to Main Street, or to 5th Street, or to the library, or wherever they might be going. Okay. A second focus area is what we call Shanker to Lincoln Way development. And this is important because of the big investment that's happening right outside the door here in the plaza. And the identification of what we call the bank block, which is the block just south of us on Burnett. We call it the bank block because it's got, I think, two or three banks on it, and it's largely underutilized, that block. And it provides that link between Shanker Plaza and Main Street and Tom Evans Plaza and the parking area behind Main Street. So this focus area has a couple pieces to it. First of all, we would suggest looking at Burnett Avenue, which is the street that ends right at Tom Evans Plaza, and see if we can think about that as a linear park. Not exclusively a linear park, because we think it still should have vehicles on it. So again, it's one of those streets that today is maximized for the most part for vehicular use, but in the future can creep towards a place that's more of a space. So a linear park might simply mean eliminating or transitioning the parking, which is parking on the west side of Burnett, into a super wide sidewalk, 20-foot wide sidewalk with a park-like space, okay? And that linear park could extend up the next block to 6th Street and possibly even to 7th Street. But that's that important connection between Shanker Plaza down to Tom Evans Plaza. So let's talk a little bit about Tom Evans, which is just south of Main Street, which Burnett comes right into. That space is ready for a redo. It could act as, we think it could act as the downtown's sort of center stage or living room, if you will. It can be opened up and become that really important connection between parking and Main Street, because that's really how people get to Main Street. Part of that Tom Evans Plaza, you can see on both of these images, one looks from the north, one looks from the south. Part of that would be extending it south to through the parking area to make it a larger space. And that larger space can provide more flexibility for different types of events. What you see in these images, or actually I'll stay right here. What you see in this image is the idea of the west side of Tom Evans Plaza being occupied by a new intermodal ramp. We'll call it a multi-use intermodal ramp because it could have additional uses to it, such as daycare for downtown. It could have some event space. Here we're showing the idea of a pavilion, or perhaps with restrooms for downtown, a stage for downtown. Part of this intermodal idea, by the way, is includes the idea of taking the side ride function that happens outside the door of City Hall right here on Fifth, and moving it into the intermodal ramp with better waiting facilities, better driver facilities, better connectivity with each other, better connectivity with, say, bike rental, maybe even car rental. So turning it into a mobility hub as well. Okay, so Tom Evans Plaza ends this linear park and gets extended even a little bit further into the parking lot, and maybe even to the bridge link to the link if that project goes forward. And then this shows it looking back up north. You can see the intermodal off to the left. We're looking up through Tom Evans Plaza. Okay. The third focused area is the east side around Duff Avenue. I want to point out that the city owns the property in front. I don't know if this, oh, here we go. Yeah. The city owns, let's see if I can get over there. The city owns the property in front of the power plant, which is, I lost my hand. There it is. This property right here. The city, so this, I just want to note that the city owns that property, has some control over it. The recommendation for that property from this plan is not to use it for housing, in part because of its direct adjacency to the power plant, but rather to use it for future commercial development. Other elements to speak to on the east side here, this takes another look at it, is the idea of highlighting the power plant. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. It's the tallest building in town. You can see it all the way from the highway. It is the city's skyscraper. It's pretty cool. And highlighting it or celebrating it as a piece of public art. So would the power company be interested in that? We don't know. We haven't had that discussion, but there are great examples all around the country and all around the world of using buildings as art. This focus area also talks a little bit about utilizing Bandshell Park a little bit more for downtown. It's right next to Main Street, but it's not really used a whole lot by the downtown proper community. It is used a lot by the neighborhoods. We've learned that, so it's not an unused park, but it could be used also for events, and if it was felt more connected to Main Street. And then finally, City Hall and Grand Avenue. This is on the west side of the building we are in right now. So similar to the east side, this is about finding those underutilized properties, redeveloping them mostly with housing. There are a couple of, there's one or two small public space interventions here that I'll point to. One is the idea of a mid-block connection between 5th Street and Main Street. You'll see it there between two orange buildings coming right up to City Hall. And that mid-block connection follows the rhythm of streets that we see elsewhere in downtown. And perhaps it terminates into a small park or a small privately, probably not a public park, but a privately owned, publicly accessible open space right in front of Cornbread, so as to bring a little bit more life to that large parking lot. Let's see here. So this is another view of City Hall and Grand Avenue, and in pink, I think you can see that mid-block connection. The plan also puts the idea out there of a joint development between a private developer and the city, with a pretty ambitious development you'll see it on the west side there, west of City Hall, which would be a joint development in which housing could be developed alongside with a parking structure, possibly for fleet vehicles, as well as supporting the housing in and around this area. Real briefly, the plan then sort of divides these areas into these three functional layers: built form, connectivity, and public realm. The bullet points underneath each of those are not new to this presentation. So new development, new hotels, using streets, transitioning streets from vehicular dominated by cars to used for people, et cetera. And then finally, we have a section on implementation. And I'll spend just a minute here on it. The main idea on implementation is a couple of them. One is to pursue incremental changes before big changes. So there's big ideas in here, whether it's intermodal ramp or whether it's a redesign of Main Street. This is big stuff, and big stuff is always disruptive. Obviously, you do it because you think there's something worthwhile when it's done. But I recognize that it's a big change. So this plan talks about making incremental changes before the big investments. And the purpose of making those incremental changes is to establish new norms and new patterns of use of a place so that the big changes are more acceptable. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. The plan also talks about the Main Street pursuing SMID designation, and also offers the plan to the city for your annual CIP process. And we have some initial costs in there for contemplation.
Andrew, for those who may not know what SMID means, would you explain that?
Sure.
Or someone else going to do that already?
I'm happy to do it. SMID is a self-sustaining municipal improvement district, and this is an arrangement where a district puts together a self-imposed like tax upon the assessment of the property in order to generate funds to support projects that are included in this plan, and along with other organizations and things as well that support the said district. So, is that anything else to add there?
And those funds are just used only in that area, right?
Correct.
So an image here that talks about some immediate next steps. So beginning discussions with SIRIDE and potential funding partners for that intermodal facility that I mentioned earlier. Initiating the redesign of Tom Evans Plaza. Expanding the mural program and exploring that idea of gang dumpsters or shared refuse. And improving the backside of Main Street. Discussing those art opportunities with the Ames Electric Service. And then up on the top, the idea of encouraging creative programming with a wide variety of community partners and investing in, we can call them light or pop-up amenities throughout downtown. Those elements are important because they are, again, those smaller incremental ways to change the way downtown is used. To increase stewardship in the public realm, to prove that downtown is a desirable place for events and community partners. And all this can be done in the next 2 to 3 years before the bigger changes come online, because it does take that long. So that is what I have for you. Sam, Travis, would you like to add anything if I may have missed? You good?
I think it's extremely important for people to understand that this is a vision. This is not set in stone. This is not, the way forward. A lot of these aspects are visionary. And so I think we, need to take the time to look at a lot of the aspects of this plan that may concern the general public and make sure that it fits for every need. There's no elimination of parking here. There might be some thoughts about redesigning parking, turning it to parallel parking or staggered diagonal parking, or a little bit of both. These kinds of concepts, I think, are what helps moves us forward through discussions and figuring out the best fit for our community with regards to a lot of this vision. The development opportunities that you see in orange there are extremely exciting. Hotels and housing and things to support the businesses that we currently have in downtown is crucial, I think, to the future success of downtown. But at the same time, too, I want people to understand that a lot of these opportunities, too, are visionary as well. And so if you are looking at a parcel of land on downtown on that image there, and you don't see a building that is currently there now, that doesn't mean we're going to go down and knock it down tomorrow or anything. We just know that eventually there will be a time when that building is not being used or wants to be sold. And we can turn to this vision and say, okay, what are some ideas that can come from development of this parcel of land to improve our downtown district? Commercial, residential, mixed use, whatever the vision calls for, it gives us a guide to go off of. And I think that's really important to stress as well. I think the connections that we're making here between Schenker Plaza and future Lincoln Way development is crucial for not only the current residents and visitors that we have to downtown, but future tourism as well. In regards to the connection that Andrew spoke about between Main Street and Banshall Park, that commercial, maybe possibly mixed use space of a possible parking ramp there in front of the public or the power plant is a great connection between that Main Street feel going across the street and then going up into an event space like Banshall Park. It really helps connect and bring Banshall Park into the fabric of downtown and events downtown. One of the things that Andrew pointed on just for a little bit, but didn't discuss very much, was the idea too of at times looking at Douglas as being a possible event space. A festival street, I think, is what we call it in the vision plan. And so it fits really well with the amenities that are already there. The public library, the Ames History Museum, the Octagon Arts Center. These things speak to festivals that we already currently enjoy and have. And so to have spaces that can be protected by pop-up bollards that would protect those inside that space, but at the same time give us the room to do those events. A great way of reimagining streets as future spaces and event spaces that we know. This in turn also gives us the ability to add more programming to downtown. I think somebody told me that we have over 100 different cultures represented in Ames. There's more cultural experiences and lifting up that we can be doing through different programming in downtown. I see a lot of head shaking, and then that's exactly the idea of being able to create more spaces to be able to do those kinds of things. Certainly with the expansion of Tom Evans Park and creating a possible stage, seating outside, there's more opportunity there as well. And I love the backside of Main Street being activated and really bringing in both sides of blocks that currently right now, when you drive into downtown or walk into downtown, bike, whatever you do, aren't really appeasing to the public eye. And so to be able to activate those spaces and bring them into that feeling of arriving in a destination type setting, I think is extremely important. Anything I missed, Sam?
No, you covered quite a bit.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we
I guess we can
opening up for questions? Yeah.
All right, questions?
And I'll just throw this one out initially, and then I'll sit back and let some other people ask questions. But Andrew, I may have asked you this when we first saw you, but we have a lot more people who are watching tonight. First glance, I love this. We asked you, unanimously to come back with something that was bold, swing for the fence. I think we used that phrase. We didn't want to just come and do a ribbon cutting for a new plant downtown. But I think it'd be helpful. We know these two gentlemen, but could you just give just a little bit of introduction about yourself and background, and maybe are there some specific communities that you've worked in where you've seen this kind of process of visioning work? Because I think that's helpful. You bring a lot of credibility to this process, and I want to be respectful to you and allow people to understand the background that you bring to the table.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Well, my background is in liberal arts, and that's important because I'm kind of I'm a little bit of a jack of many trades. I'm not a specialist, I'm a generalist. And the reason why that's important is because that's what downtowns are. There are many things for many people. If they're designed as single-use places, they don't work. They are single-use districts, right? So I'm a proud liberal arts guy. From there, I went on into architecture and urban planning. From there, I went on to working city government for a handful of years as a city planner. From there, and then I went into consulting. And since I've been in as an urban planner in the private sector, I've worked entirely, I'd say 95% in urban areas. All right. So very, very little new growth work, like you might see up in those photographs there, very little. And I like it because it pulls together soft data and hard data. It's about places that are nuanced, places that are complicated, places that are never done. I think that's really important. I'm not going to say an anti-preservationist, but I sometimes worry about we preserve things when they're not done yet. So places continue to change. Geographically, I've been in the Midwest for almost my career. I did 6 years in Pittsburgh, but so I'd say 60, 70% of geographically, my work has been in the Midwest. But I've done quite a other 30, 40% on the Eastern Seaboard and Southeast. I have not worked in New York City. I've not worked in Chicago. I've not worked in Los Angeles. Almost all my work is in communities similar in size to Ames. Obviously, I do a lot in Minneapolis because I live in Minneapolis, but I've done, the around the Chippewa Falls, the Dubuque, the other sort of satellite cities in the Midwest. The city or the experience that I have that I draw on one of the most is when I worked in Hampton, Virginia. Okay, they have an old downtown, similar. It's a bigger city, but the downtown is similar in size, and it was all about making that transition from a historic district into a lively downtown by finding and identifying the underutilized parcels. Starting to think about parking differently, starting to think about streets differently. In these kinds of environments, you rarely are making large, you can be ambitious, but you're rarely making large geometric swaths of moves. You're usually working with what you got. So does that help? That's some of my background.
It does. And I appreciate, I just think it's helpful for us to know about your background. So I'm going to sit tight, let other people ask questions, but thanks for that introduction.
Sure.
Right. I think Amber and Gloria are online. Are either one of you have any questions to start with?
Yeah, I have a few questions. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
I was wondering about the idea of focus within the downtown. And when I look at the vision here, you have those 4 separate areas, but it feels like each of those areas has an entertainment space and a parking ramp. And I don't know, I just don't think our downtown is all that big. So I'm wondering if having multiple event spaces with stages is overkill, or if we're diffusing the focus by suggesting we have these different places. Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy behind that, Andrew?
Sure, happy to do that. So public spaces are essential for public life. They're the places where people socialize, they're places where people gather formally and informally. Downtown needs a lot of them. They don't all need to be used for stages and concerts. So I don't want that to be the impression. I think the idea is that everyone in downtown, whether you are working or living, is within a stone's throw of an enjoyable public space. And that's particularly important in an old downtown because unlike, you're not going to have 250 unit apartment buildings with their own pools in downtown. You don't have the footprint for that. It would also be a little out of scale. You're going to have a series of smaller 50, maybe 100 unit, if not 25 unit apartment buildings that will rely on public space for their amenity, if you will. Right? I think we had a resident in the hotel building at one of our meetings, and she said, you know, I don't have a common space in my building. I use the park for my common space. So it speaks to the importance of emphasizing a prominent and connected public realm. And hopefully when you look at the plan and you layer development with connectivity, with public space, you can see, hopefully we can all see how downtown becomes a place that you are always within a high quality public space first to enjoy a variety of experiences. And again, I don't want to give the impression that everything is an entertainment space. Some spaces are passive and quiet and contemplative. Other spaces are flexible and can be used for entertainment. So does that help?
Yeah, I think it was more that I was reading them all as entertainment spaces. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with the need for common spaces and outdoor gathering locations scattered throughout the downtown. It just felt like every one of them was going to be a place where we were having concerts, and that didn't seem to make sense.
Yeah.
So let's see, I had a couple other questions. The plan seems to rely eventually on us getting some private property owners to be willing to sell their properties or to redevelop their properties. For example, that plan for west of City Hall, we have a number of property owners there, I think. How do we initiate changes that involve the assembling of private property? Is that something that we simply leave to the developers of Ames to work on? Is it something that the city needs to be pushing for? Is it something that Main Street takes the lead on? Can you give me some insights on it?
Sure. So there are a couple of new development opportunities that are on private property, that are on public property, some that are adjacent. I would suggest that the city would have to agree on this as a policy issue. But it's important so it's a city-led initiative. It's not a Main Street-led. Main Street's not necessarily a development organization. I would suggest that it should be a partnership situation with a private developer. And there's a lot of different ways that could go down. That said, most of the development here, a lot of the development here is truly privately led. And it's exclusive of public, it could be exclusive of any public involvement. And I think a good plan is that it has initiatives that are in which the city has a strong hand in, and initiatives in which the city does not have a strong hand. It's just, and the private sector runs with it. But on those properties that are city owned, those would be city-led initiatives.
If I can just add into, I think it's a little bit of everything that you mentioned, Gloria. City-led, developer-led, Main Street-led. We do a fair amount of economic development work within the context of downtown. And so working with our partners at the Alliance and building a cohort of developers from throughout the community who have been involved in several discussions of this vision can help with building out this framework if and when the time comes that those buildings or parcels are become available.
Okay, great, thank you. I have some other more specific questions, but I will cede the floor to my other colleagues so they can ask their questions first.
Thank you. Amber, any questions?
Just one question. I'll start with a comment. I love a lot of what is in this plan and really excited about some of the vision that you have all laid out here. This piggybacks a little bit off of Gloria's question, but we obviously all understand that the plan is visionary, it's aspirational, but we also want to see action. We want to see things moving forward. I don't think any of us wants to see this as a document that ends up on a shelf somewhere. So are there shorter term actual items that you're looking for from council, as well as, or I guess maybe, so that's my first question. And then, have you looked at sort of a timeline of when things happen or how we make things happen?
So so the long picture of a timeline, no, we have not sort of phased it out over 20 years. So we didn't do that, but in the implementation section on page 48 and somewhat summarized on the slide up on the screen right now are a couple of the selected short-term actions that could be some led by the city, some led by Main Street. So initiating the redesign of Tom Evans Plaza was one of the projects, I should say, that sort of did percolate up to the top as a higher priority. Higher priority than, for example, converting the Douglas into a festival street. So maybe that is phased in later. Now, that said, in the short term, we would recommend using Douglas as an event space with temporary barriers to sort of work it, to change the patterns of use in the downtown, to prove support, to prove success of the idea of a festival street before investing in it more substantially. So I would encourage you to look at page 48 for those series of short-term actions. And by short-term, I think we can say that's in the next 2 to 3 years.
Anything else, Amber?
Not right.
That answer your question?
Mayor, could I just follow up on the short-term actions? Because that was something I was going to mention.
Certainly.
It's not so much a question, but one of the Main Street actions is pursue a Great Places designation. We had a Great Places designation in 2017. Do we lose that after a certain point?
That's a great question. When I looked on the Iowa Great Places website, I didn't see Ames listed. So I took that to mean that we didn't have that designation, but I can certainly pursue that even more and see if that's maybe an error on the state's part. But something that we wanted to put in the plan, whether we had it or not. So I will look into that, Gloria.
Yeah, I think it was 2017 that the cultural district got that designation. And This is perhaps a question for the city manager. One of the other things under the Alliance and Main Street actions is work with Ames Electric Services to commission an artist to reimagine the power plant towers, a landmark and community anchor in downtown. And it seems to me that we had an art competition at some point, Steve,
Yeah, good.
to do something with the power plant.
Yeah, good memory on your part. We had what's called the Landmark Challenge, and we actually offered a monetary prize many years ago. And we had people from all over, not only Iowa, but outside of Iowa, that submitted proposals on how to turn that into a positive landmark equal to the St. Louis Arch or something else. So we're certainly willing to participate in that.
What happened?
Um,
Clearly, nothing didn't happen.
We picked the winner and no one pursued it. No one followed up on it. Yep, there was some interesting options there for us, but I think that's what we thought before too. It's the tallest structure too, which can be seen almost from Highway 30, and could be something, obviously Main Street, it could be something turned into a positive versus a negative. And I'm sure that since the electric director reports to me, I'm sure it will be positive and enthusiastically support it. So we tried it once and we certainly want to do it again.
And the third item from that same short-term list, but this is an action led by the city, explore a shared parking and parking benefit district policy that will enable better utilization of existing parking resources and enable infill development. Andrew, could you say something about what a shared parking or parking district or benefit district might look like for the downtown?
Sure. So the idea behind that is it's a mechanism to manage your parking in the most efficient possible way, so that spaces are used at market rate and they're efficiently used for the variety of users that downtown attracts, whether they're employers, residents, or visitors or shoppers. And then the idea behind that also is that the revenues that come from that are used not just on parking, but they're used to help improve the physical environment of downtown, because parking is, I often say there's sort of 3 legs to the journey. The first leg is getting to downtown. The second leg is finding your parking spot. And then the third leg, which is actually one of the most important, is going from your parking spot to your destination. And if that third leg is a crummy experience, it doesn't matter what the first 2 legs are. So the idea of a parking benefit district is one that helps focus on that leg and, well, all 3 legs of the experience as well. So does that help explain it a little bit?
Yep, thank you.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it for now, thanks.
Thank you.
Gloria, just to piggyback off of your question about the Great Places designation, I'm getting some information from one of my colleagues at the Alliance who said that the recertification didn't happen, unfortunately, in whatever recent years. So it is something for us to pursue again.
Thank you.
Thank you for finding that out, Travis.
You're welcome.
All right. Brahma, what are you thinking?
Well, there's a lot of it I like, and thank you for the great presentation. It seems like there's a lot of things that depend on each other, right? And so that it's this tangle of things that have to happen at the same time, or that have to be ordered pretty closely. And so I think Amber kind of mentioned that when she asked about a timeline. And so, no, there's not exactly a timeline, but have you started to pair things that require one for the other to happen? Like, do we have any sense of how many things are like that, where, we'll need the addition of parking in order to do anything else? Or, and that maybe that's why it's a first step.
Yeah. So you point out the fact that there are some dependency relationships and sequencing relationships. The big one relates to Main Street. And the point of most of the short-term improvements are to eventually get to the place where Main Street has less parking on, not no parking on it, but less parking on it and more people space on it. But you need to improve the connections to Main Street, need to shift the supply around a little bit. So those are some of the important dependencies, I think. But a lot of the plan is not fully. I mean, not all, but some of the private development is not dependent on anything. Some is dependent on having some external parking. I'll confess to that. But we haven't gone through this like a full 15, 20 year sort of phasing process that identifies every single dependency. But as I mentioned before, the first one really is you don't want to disrupt Main Street until you've done these other pieces. That's the important point.
Sure. Thank you. That's helpful.
I think something that Andrew and I have talked about too, and I think it's noted in your document, is that a lot of this depends on analyzing a block by block basis, taking a look at the needs of a block and reevaluating things like parking, public space, those kinds of redesigns that we're being introduced to here to evaluate what's best for the next implementation. I think to also answer Amber's question as well about kind of where do we go from here. I think barring your acceptance of the vision, our idea is to work together with you and city staff to put together a guiding vision task force that would start looking at what are the phasings and starting to build out that phasing process that Andrew is talking about over the next 10, 15, even 20 years.
Yeah, thank you.
Because the implementation is the most important thing here. It's great to have this document, but it doesn't do us any good if we don't act on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
I think that's it for now.
All right. How about you, Anita?
I'm also really excited about this vision, and I did especially appreciate the looking at bandshell and opportunities there. I do think that is much more than a neighborhood park, and so looking at ways to connect that better to the downtown, but also thinking about how do we make sure that that's an area that people can access easily for events and things, so that they aren't perhaps parking further down the road or in the neighborhood in order to be at events there at bandshell. So I was glad to see that. I just wondered what other things you're thinking about in that entry area, thinking about coming north and then getting to Main Street with bandshell on the right and downtown Main Street on the left. Are there some other things you've thought about to make that a clear entry into the downtown area?
Well, the redevelopment of the property that's in front of the power plant will be a natural gateway. Like you don't need a sign that's, it says welcome to downtown, because you'll sense it. I do think that clarity, everyone know the second leg of the journey, finding your parking space. I do think clarity, parking, take a left is important.
Signage.
It's a little thing, but I think it's a significant thing. It gives people certainty as to where to go, which then means they're not circulating blocks and getting frustrated. So I think there also is a little bit of unused space right at the southwest corner of Duff and Main Street that could be put to better use. We don't call it out as a public park because I don't think it would work well, but it certainly could be, there could be some improvements to that little piece as well.
Great.
And that could be too where there is maybe some public art or signage that welcomes people into downtown.
Yeah.
I think the other entrance coming in from the south along Kellogg or even Clark with the expansion of the rear facade mural project that the Ames Foundation is helping to lead, will also be a great visual aspect of saying you're coming into this new district and welcome. So those are some other aspects we're looking at as well.
Okay. And then I just wondered, since you've done this in a number of cities, what did you find coming into the area that you were really excited was already here? Just a general, like, what did you think? Oh, yes, they've already got that
To
in
me,
Ames.
it was the number of those purple buildings, the number of kind of community anchors around downtown. That was, I don't know, that jumped out pretty quickly to me. I had been here 15 years ago, or well, sooner than that. So I was a little familiar with Main Street. So that didn't jump out to me. But after spending more time in here and learning about the different institutions that are downtown, that jumped out at me. And I think it makes for a very exciting anchor for development around it.
Great.
That and the food at Cornbread. Of course.
You've been, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
You're buying tonight, right?
What do you think, Rachel?
That's it.
I also really appreciate all the work that's gone into this vision. I think it is exciting. One thing that I'm concerned about is a lot of the short-term actions are around the open spaces and not around housing. And I know getting more people to live downtown is a really important part of supporting the area. So what do you think are some initial steps that we could take towards getting more housing in the area?
So I think Travis mentioned one of them, which is to start to establish a kind of a roster of developers who may be interested in working downtown. I know that the city has lowered its parking requirements for smaller buildings, I think. You could consider lowering them for larger buildings as well. That's something that could be looked at. That provides a lot of flexibility for developers. What else? The city could start to initiate those discussions on the city-owned properties. But development it takes time. I mean, and we're not in a highly, hopefully we're coming out of an unfavorable building environment as costs are starting to flatten out and all that. It was pretty tough for the last 2 years. But there's a lot of pent-up demand. So we think, hopefully, at least we'll be entering in a more favorable, as interest rates go down, labor and material costs stabilize, and we'll enter into that very positive development period. So those are a couple things.
Anything else? Any questions?
I don't think so.
All right, Tim?
So I've spent almost 29 years downtown. I have a deep love for downtown, and the questions and comments I have to couch in the fact that I have a very loose grip on these kind of things. I love sort of thinking outside the box, and I love the visionary aspect of this. So that's sort of a background to some of the questions I have. And I want to think too about the role that our future of the community plays into this. So we have a very important need for attracting and retaining families and young people in the community. If we don't pay attention to this, we're going to be a senior citizen community. Mm-hmm. We're going to have all these university people, and then the community side is going to be a senior citizen community. We'll have no kids for our schools. So housing, I appreciate Rachel leading us off with that. Housing is important, but these amenities for me, it's not the amenities by themselves. I'm thinking about these amenities at how they play into the future of our community. So if we want to be truly a growing, dynamic community, all of these things are pieces of the larger puzzle. So that's another sort of aspect that I bring to this. And I think this is hard. We, in this community, we have a spectrum of people who feel a very vested interest in this. And so there are people on one end of that I typically call cave people, and I mean that in love, citizens against virtually everything.
All right.
So you cannot propose a new planner and they'll want to protest, right? So we have those people, and then you have me, and I'm sort of off in this ditch over here where there isn't a building I wouldn't see come down and something better come up. So I recognize that in myself, we have to have a process that respects a wide variety of different values and views. We don't get to just run with our own. That's what representative democracy is about. So I want to talk about just a couple specifics with those things in mind. I love the way that you're starting for us to talk about the streets. I totally agree. And you mentioned this other university city in the eastern side of Iowa. I will mention it, Iowa City. They have phenomenal sidewalk restaurants, cafes, and I go over there for meetings and things. I'm like, why can't we have some of these things here? So I've tortured Sam with this idea for 5 years. Just throw this out here. But I love the idea of trying to find ways to blow these sidewalks out. And I'm very open to like a one-way street so that it would maximize what we could do for our sidewalks. So thinking about the space, not solely for cars, but also for how we consider the spacing. So I loved just a comment. And you're a planner, so you have better ideas on how that can go along. But I also want to be sensitive to the businesses that are on Main Street that they need to get their customers into their business. So it is true that we are wanting the downtown to be more bike friendly, and certainly it will be with whatever we do. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that there are many people for whom biking is not an option, and it's 3 degrees outside. So we have the weather to contend with. So there has to be a role, at least for a while, for the automobile. I wanted to say a word about alleys. There are some communities like Marion that have totally blown up the idea of their alleys, just phenomenally dynamic things. We had a chance to do a city tour to Marion. I'm walking down the alley, like, this is an alley? So my office is right on an alley. This is unbelievable what some of these cities are doing. So I just like to throw that out there, that there may be some spaces in our alleys that are undiscovered gems that we might consider. I love what you said about the downtown being an area for entrepreneurs. And I want to just put another placeholder for this. The mayor and I had a chance to visit over in Coralville, where they had some city-owned spaces that were for entrepreneurs. And I love this idea of creating some opportunities where you have businesses that wouldn't normally be able to afford market rents get a foothold start. So I'm just sorry, some of this is just sort of machine gun.
Were those in, I'm just curious, in Coralville, were those in storefront spaces, or were they like
Yeah, they were in the
shipping
storefronts.
container
It was the,
sort of thing?
I keep forgetting the name of the place. It was at the river, no, what's the name of that development in Coralville?
Was it actually an incubator type space?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's, I always forget the name of that in Coralville. Anyway,
I remember
we'll get it afterwards.
talking about, but I don't remember the name.
And hopefully this part will be edited out of the video part, and I'll deny this after the meeting, so don't put any of this in the notes. But I'm not married to Bandshell Park being like Bandshell Park forever. So if we were to create Bandshell Park or a community center for concerts, we would never put it where it is today. No way. It's next to trains. It's next to a lot of traffic. There's no parking. So we would never put Bandshell Park there. Nobody would. And yet somehow we're shackled to the idea that this is where Bandshell Park must be. So, and maybe this is blasphemous, but I would like us just as part of our visioning to say, what would it be like if we had an outstanding concert venue where actually there wasn't a train going by every 5 minutes, there weren't motorcycles going by, you could actually get there by, reasonable parking. So I'm just throwing that out there. I may lose my next election bid because of this, but there it is. Sorry. You have defined the boundaries of your work necessarily in the scope of what we assigned you. But I wanted to point out that there are some areas to the southeast of downtown. So on the east side of Duff, older warehouse spaces that I think are fascinating. So you mentioned Dubuque, one of my favorite towns in Iowa for what they've done with redevelopment. If people haven't been to Dubuque, they're missing out. It's one of the gems. I don't know what the availability is, but it is so close to downtown. I just wonder if, as we think about this downtown visioning, if we're missing something by not saying, could we draw that line over there and just imagine what that could be like?
Mm-hmm.
It's across stuff, but those buildings are really fascinating. And I wonder if their full economic use is being utilized. And as we move towards making changes with our resource recovery plant, I think there's going to be a renaissance of East Lincoln Way that what we saw with South Duff and the explosion of redevelopment, I think that there's going to be incredible opportunities on East Lincoln Way. And so those buildings now will tie in development that's East Lincoln Way with those kind of spaces. I'm quite excited about the potential of that. So I apologize. This is a lot of stream of consciousness. I want to go to the particulars that Rachel sort of started the conversation on the housing. So this parking issue, I think, is the elephant in the room. We have got to find a way to create parking opportunities. Could you give us even just, do you have a sense of preliminaries as far as the kinds of volume of parking that we would need? And maybe you think about this in phases. Maybe we think phase one is this many spaces in phase two or phase three. But could you give us just some thoughts about what that parking component is like? Because I think Bronwyn hit on it, that as well, that as we think about like critical dominoes that need to fall, I don't know how, I just think that's we can do cool things with the park. And I loved all those things you're doing, connecting Shanker Park with the going south. But the parking, we got to have a conversation about that. Could you give us some sense about the volume of parking we need?
The volume of parking you need. I can't give you an accurate sense. The first step is to, well, the first step that we recommend here is to not to redo the Walker parking plan, but to look at the to redo the occupancy study portion of it. That plan was done how many years ago? 5 years ago, I think.
2019.
Or
19.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay, so 5 or so, 6 years ago or so, to look at those numbers again, because it's different now. With the risk getting into a little bit too much detail, the occupancy numbers from that study showed that at the busiest time of the week, which was I think 1 to 3 in the afternoon, there were a couple of hot spots, or there was a single hot spot, which is about 2 or 3 blocks. And you can imagine where it is. It's right around Main Street on the eastern edge. And by hot spot, what we mean is the occupancy is more than 80%. Another way to put that is when driving, looking for a spot, it's a low chance, not a big chance you're going to get a spot. Okay, so it's a hot spot. So is that hot spot? Now, that's not a bad thing. I mean, that means people are using it. That's not an altogether bad thing. You do want turnover, however. So first thing would be to look at the occupancy and to see if that hotspot still exists and is it much larger. At the end of the day, though, parking people love to say this, you don't have a parking problem, you have a walking problem. And that's not entirely true here. We all have a walking problem. So I think that exists. But I also, when in a city that you have some buildings that have reuse ability, and and they have no space on their property for parking. So that's where you start to get towards this demand for off-site parking. So the main thing though is to first off to make sure you're making best use of your resource by making sure you're charging market demand for it and you're using it cleverly. So you can oversell spaces, you can and while still getting full use out of them. So it's sort of like really good management of your existing resources is the first most important thing. But we do think that you're right about at the edge of needing a ramp situation. Now, any one of these ramps that we've drawn are somewhere in the range of 200, 300 spaces. That's not a big ramp. It's a good way to start. So, you know, but I don't have like that accurate demand number for you right now. You know, parking is extremely complicated, as you guys know.
Well,
But
let me ask this way.
Yeah.
You had discussed, I think, 800 to 1,000 housing units.
Yeah.
So if we just take that alone, what's the correlative parking that's needed to support that?
Well, let's just say 800 to 2,000 spaces. Now, the thing is, though, many of those can fit within the property themselves.
Right.
Right. So I would not say you need 800 to 1,000 public spaces right now. That's not a good connection. Some of the sites can handle their own parking, no problem. The Tribune building cannot because it fills the lot, for example. Some of the smaller sites probably don't work for you. They probably would rely on off-site parking because the small sites, unless they're relieved of all their parking requirements and developer doesn't want to do them, the geometries just don't work for circulation of parking, things like that. So it becomes a cap to that site.
And that's helpful. Thank you for that. And then did you happen to look at, are there barriers that we have imposed really on ourselves in terms of, for example, height limitations on buildings in downtown? Is that a barrier?
I don't think so. If I recall, I think your zoning envelope is 6 or 7 stories. Is that right? 7 stories. So I don't necessarily see that as a cap at this stage.
All right, so we have another item on the agenda yet tonight. So is there I want to do is just make a few comments, and also I want to ask a question also. Is there anything else that you want to bring up? I mean, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Right. So is there anything that's really pressing tonight that you really like to make sure that we get in before we kind of wind this down and transition into our next point?
Sure. Just one more thing. I appreciate that, Mayor. In terms of next steps, you have some momentum going. I think there are a lot of people in the community, and we appreciate people attending on a cold night and people who are watching. So I think there's some general interest and momentum in this. And really, from any of you, what would you recommend as next steps to see this continue?
Actually, I was going to propose some next steps.
Why don't you go ahead and do it?
Sure.
That'd be perfect.
I'll bounce them off of the.
And I did spend some time when I had a second here. I was looking at the Hampton, Virginia. They have a very interesting, I would just encourage people to take a look at the downtown Hampton master plan. And so I like the idea of looking at cities that are ahead of us in some ways. What are best practices? How can we learn from others who have gone before us? And so that has some really interesting features and some of the tools in their toolkit that they've adopted for encouraging some of this development. With that, thanks, Mayor.
Thanks. So can you share maybe just a couple of quick stories on successes in some of your projects, and what was the downtown area like,
Sure.
and what's it like today, just to kind of cast a vision and get some excitement and
Yeah.
enthusiasm in terms of where we're going, because it's one thing to see it on paper, but with your, Tim, it's a great question. What's your experience been? Share with us just some, what the community's appetite.
Sure. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about Dubuque, because that's one I've worked in for quite a long time. And the situation was a little different there. They were contending with 1 million square feet of empty building space. And the properties were owned by generally, I think, 3 building owners or so. That project absolutely required a public investment in a parking ramp, because these buildings, the 1 million square feet of buildings, which is, let's just say it was something like 6 buildings or something like that, they occupied the full property. So actually, we looked to see if you could park within the buildings, but the common spacing prevented that. So it needed that public investment. So this is also a warehouse sort of area. So I talked about public realm before. There was zero public realm. I mean, zero public realm. So the plan basically, coming out of the gates, recommended building new streets, because there were 0 streets. The joke was you could break an ankle or an axle on these streets, which was true, you could. So rebuild the streets and do a small 2-level parking ramp as the first things. And that's what enabled these, that gave confidence to the developers to redevelop the buildings using state historic tax credits. But also, and I think this is important, the parking ramp that they built, they partnered with the feds and Amtrak and built this simple 2-level deck as a multimodal ramp. So I think something like 40 spaces are reserved for Amtrak use, and the rest is managed by the city in an intelligent, in a really clever way to maximize the use of them. So some are leased out to residents, some are used for short term, et cetera, et cetera. The city is now, on that theme of public realm, the city is now going to turn the surface lot, which is next to the parking ramp, into a park for their downtown. So those 3 investments in public realm were extremely important for getting these 1 million square feet of building redeveloped with I think something like 300 employees downtown, and something like maybe as many as 500 units within there. So
Living units.
yeah, living units. So it was a good example of partnering with the private sector, public sector, partnering with the private sector, public sector saying, we have some infrastructure responsibilities, we have public space responsibilities, we have public realm responsibilities, we'll take care of that. And private developers do the buildings. One of the interesting, I think it applies a little bit here, one of the interesting things that we learned, however, is that due to the dimensions of the buildings, because we're refilling old buildings, the city didn't get the unit mix that they expected. They were expecting students and young professionals, but actually the units ended up to be larger. So the density of units was a little bit lower than what they expected. In new construction, you're not as constrained. You have more flexibility, so you can target a little bit more. So, you've been to Dubuque. It's a cool place. It's a very, very cool place. Chippewa Falls is another city that I've done quite a bit of work in. And again, that's more of a riverfront town, but that was about reclaiming old industrial land along the riverfront into a pretty sizable public park, which has spurred on growth downtown. So those are just two examples that I think, have some applicability here.
Good, thank you. Travis, you mentioned a guiding vision task force. I added the word guiding vision implementation task force.
Yeah.
Have you worked on one before?
I have not,
Okay,
no.
all right, well, Tim, to
Now
your
the
point,
chair.
so
Going
tonight's
to.
meeting there's no action tonight. It was basically reviewing, listening, asking questions. This hopefully will initiate public feedback. People haven't been, exposed to it. And then this is going to come back to a future city council meeting, maybe in the next month, maybe 30 days, 45 days, work with the city manager, find out when that's going to work. We'll offer people an opportunity to offer public feedback. But I would propose that at that meeting, we actually have a guiding vision implementation task force already ready to launch. Because I think that I'm concerned that this is going to become a sit on the shelf, nice document, nice images. And I'm thinking about what's the low hanging fruit? What are some things we can get doing right now? And I think to Amber's question, I think all of us are asking the question, okay, we need a plan. What is the first step, the second step, the third step? There's big items or small items, but the point is we just got to work together to say what is achievable. And yeah, parking ramps going to cost a lot of money. Well, where do we start? I'm already reaching out to federal government. Are there other programs? Are there grants available? We're going to start some conversations with that, talking to SciRide. Are there opportunities for that? Are there partnering with other groups? So, but I think we're going to hit this ground running. And essentially, is once we council will not adopt it, basically, receive it, take it under advisement. But at that point, let's immediately roll into the next step and start talking about that. Because before we know it, we're talking about other things, CIP for the following, year. And if there's something, put into it, maybe not. I'm just saying that I think you want to capture, as you were saying, Tim, there's momentum here. There's some, energy. I don't think anyone wants to take this. Thank you very much. And we'll get to it next year. It won't happen.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm suggesting. And, Travis and Sam, we can talk, afterwards. And I mean, not tonight, but I mean, in the next few days and say, okay, what's it look like? What's going to be the role? This doesn't mean that public input will not influence, and give us direction, and it's going to be all along the way. This is not from an on high. It's basically, hopefully, it's a grassroots from business owners, Ames Main Street, the city, everyone working together. And I think we have great potential. And I want to re-stress, those images do not say that tomorrow there's a wrecking ball coming. Right. Some of that may never happen because people may say, no, we're not going to yield our property. That's fine, but you have to have some kind of a vision of what you could do if someone wants to repurpose the property.
Mhm.
So, Travis, Sam, Andrew, any closing comments?
I'd just like to start off by saying thank you so much for being open-minded and willing to see these visions with us. I kind of, to answer one of Tim's thoughts was, this is a great place to start. And, looking at, the warehouse district that you mentioned and some of the other locations along the perimeters of what we currently call downtown are maybe next steps. I would eventually like for this area of the community to be kind of a hub or a city center and not just a downtown, where we're focusing and expanding our thoughts of, the businesses along south of Lincoln Way, the Aquatic Center and those warehouse district, and really trying to expand that vision. But this is a great place to start. I certainly want to thank everybody that's had their hands in this, including the nearly 1,000 responses that we got to the community survey. After we met with you, it was very important for you to hear back from the community, and we got almost 1,000 responses from that survey. And the cool thing was that 100 of them were university students. And so we had a swath of different demographics giving us input that we then sent to Andrew and his team to utilize and make sure that a lot of those key points that were given to us were put into this plan. So we really feel like this is a community effort here. And it's really, I think, proven into some really good visioning here. So just want to thank everybody for their help with putting this forth tonight. So
Just briefly, I like the fact that downtown Ames has a lot already going for it in terms of, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we have city services and a lot of hubs within downtown, grocery stores, amenities. We have entertainment. We have great retail stores. And so what we're trying to do is capitalize on things that we already have, right? And let's move it forward, except for the one thing of housing. And so I too appreciate Rachel's comment about housing as an interesting starting point for our task force that we'll be putting together. How can we get more people living in downtown? And as we all know, people attract people, and that's a big motivation for this visioning plan. But thank you all for your time and effort tonight.
Any closing comments, Andrew?
No final comments. Just thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to do this work, to meet you, to meet the community, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, and just Sam, to your point, I think that I see as task force as being, it's what are projects, what is the specific timeline that we're going to start working for. We got public, we got private, we got joint, as well. And then start hanging some numbers on it in terms of trying to be somewhat realistic, on that. And then just see what our, first step is next. So anyway.
Great.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate your all the hard work Andrew Bolton
Thank you.
put in. Very well done. Thank you, Travis. Thanks and Sam for guiding that vision. And Nicole, I know you're sitting back there, kind of behind the weeds. I know you had a key role too. And everyone else, thank you for coming. We're going to need to continue the conversation and take every input seriously and into consideration. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to transition into the next item on the agenda. After these fine gentlemen leave, we'll transition into the animal shelter conversation.
Yes, more than one grocery store downtown. Yes.
I should have made a joke. Should you check out Fairway too? You were like, huh?
Yeah.
I'll be in. If we just put it there, it'll work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Even Gloria.
No.
7:45. Ransom plays basketball.
All right, good evening. Chief, who's going to, you gonna lead us off tonight? Or who's going to take care of it?
I can start things.
All right.
So really the thing we're here before you tonight is approval to purchase the property at 2715 Dayton Avenue for what we hope will be our future animal shelter and control facility. We've spoken about it a couple of times. I think you're familiar with the existing building. We do have our consultant that's here tonight that can go through some of the things that they've found and their recommendation for the property. But obviously, we're here to recommend that we purchase the building and move ahead with the project. And we've got some cost estimates as we go too that will give you an idea of what we're looking at.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone on the council, for meeting with us tonight. My name is Brett Van Zee. I'm with Envision Architecture out of Des Moines. Online with us also, we have Scott Learned with Design Learn. He's our animal shelter specialist. He's on with us here till probably about 8 o'clock. We've really appreciated the last 6+ weeks that we've had where we've worked on this project, from being brought on at the beginning of the year to really meet with the police chief and his staff, the animal shelter team, and Ron and all of his staff, as well as city staff, to really understand the needs of the animal shelter. Our team was part of a previous study a number of years ago, and it's been really great to pick that back up and understand where things are and what some of the new needs are. What our team has done really in the last 6 weeks is evaluated the RFP and the program that was placed in there that kind of described the goals and the needs of the animal shelter, comparing that to the current animal shelter conditions and what they have in place right now as far as spaces and what they can manage for intake and things like that. Very quickly here with our need to focus on the existing building and its kind of viability. Our team's been able to do a couple of studies and very early test fits just to understand how the existing building, which is a little over 10,000 square feet, could and would work for the animal shelter project. Our review of the site, the parking lot area, site utilities, as well as the building structure shows that it's all in very good shape. The initial test fits and elements that we have done shows that the fit out of the building will work quite well. I would say, and I'm open and honest in all these conversations, the slight shape of being a little bit more of a rectangle than a square has a very small, I would say, inefficiency, but we're talking a couple percentages. We're not talking a big inefficiency. Discussions that we have had with the city and the team is that, again, when it comes to site, parking, utilities, and the building structure and envelope, all in very good shape. As we've talked to the city and staff, in order to make that facility work, we really need to rework the inside of that. So the interior workings and how that's set up as a daycare, you could probably imagine is not conducive for an animal shelter facility. So we're going to need to go in there and change a few things up. So for the purposes of tonight's meeting and discussion, we are in support of this facility and what it can do for the city of Ames, the police department, and the animal shelter needs. Corey, I don't.
As we pointed out, we are kind of recommending an addition, and Brett can talk about that a little more, and that relates to the piece that is for dog kenneling, because the type of drains and soundproofing you would need would work better outside the building, cost-wise, and trying to do it in the building. If we did it in the building, we'd probably have to remove all the floor and then figure out if we'd have to do block walls or other intensive soundproofing in that building. And soundproofing is for the animals and for staff. So that's a piece that we show. I think we still got a lot of work to do on exactly what every program in that building looks like. And if we purchase this building, we'll work towards that.
Yeah, to build on Corey's point a little bit, working through the initial program, we always kind of categorize the need to have and the nice to haves. We are very aware of that. We also look at how we can utilize space multifaceted so that we are being efficient with spaces. When we look at the overall program, really the entire interior, I think the interior footprint's a little over 10,000 square feet, 10,800. We have the ability to fill that quite well with current needs, as well as looking at a little bit of future growth. When it comes to the area that Corey mentioned, that is more conducive to a new addition, that really is your dog kennel spaces, just with the amount of floor drains, underfloor plumbing, things like that that are needed in those spaces to maintain those kind of facilities. And it makes sense that those go into an addition if we're at the hitting kind of the capacity and filling the inside of the building. The interior of the building could work and could have dog kennel spaces added to that. We've looked at a couple options for that, so that is definitely possible if we're trying to consolidate more. But the cost benefit of that starts to decline pretty quickly when you've pulled up flooring and you're starting to dig in new plumbing and things like that to that extent. I should also note the other key consideration that we try to do in animal shelter spaces, especially in the dog spaces, is acoustical control and acoustical management between the dog spaces, feline spaces, and whatnot. So building that in a little bit more of a new construction is quite advantageous.
All right. Questions? Amber or Gloria, do you have any questions? Start with you.
No. I just wondered, if we do this dog addition, do we still have additional property at this location that could be used for another city project of some kind?
Yeah, so the overall site, is like around 6 acres, but it does drop off to the west pretty drastically. But there is some room. I don't think you could do a large project, but it would definitely have room for the animal shelter need to expand, or if there was maybe something that kind of worked with the animal shelter in the future.
Currently, the property is set up off of Dayton, on the west side of Dayton, with a drive lane along the north edge, parking lot just to the south of that, and then the building to the south yet. So quite a large property expanse to the west itself. Some of our proposed addition, if that in fact would occur, is to the west and slightly north. So quite a large amount of area that's not being utilized, as Corey noted, to the west.
I should point out that the project you saw when we prepared or unveiled our CIP showed a project about $4.5 million. Now the addition wasn't factored in that, so it's going to be it'll be higher. The cost will be higher with the addition, but we're pretty optimistic that at that time the budget included $1.5 million of donations. I think we're pretty confident we'll get at least $3 million, and we're trying to work to get more because we want to put a surgical addition on there too. That may be an ad alternate depending on how much is raised, but the person who's raising is very good at it, and we're up to 3 million. And if we can get another 1.5 million or so, maybe we could do it all. So I want you to understand that the amount that's coming out of the city for the purchase will come out of the city's council priorities fund. Remember, we're going to take that out of there. We actually have already replenished that with the money from the Workiva money. Remember, they had a penalty, so we put that back into the year fund. So we're confident we have 3 million. I'm told, and maybe we could do better than that. But the 3 million should get us that addition, correct, by itself?
Yeah, what we started looking at is when we tried to look at what the program might look like in the 10,000, I think it's 600 square feet-ish. And the upper level was once you accounted for all of the spaces required to house just the animals. So if we were going to put the dogs inside, plus the cats, other exotics, there wasn't much room left for anything else. So there's no locker room. Office spaces was very limited. There was no space for volunteers. I think volunteers is a huge part of the shelter. They contribute over 7,000 hours a year to help run that facility. It would be hard to do without them. So I think we wouldn't be doing ourselves a huge favor if we didn't provide better space for those volunteers in a new shelter. And so when we started looking at it, it was pretty clear from the beginning that just the 10,600 square feet was going to be very, very tight. And then when we learned that we have already secured $3 million plus in donations, I think that's what made a reality looking at this addition for the dogs, which makes the most sense to get them out of the existing footprint, just because of the expense of trying to build that into the existing space with the soundproofing, humidity control, plumbing that has to happen, all those things. It just makes more sense to move that out, and it helps a lot. If we're able to get to the part where we're able to add kind of the clinic area, that helps us with our operating costs because we pay a lot right now for vet care, spays and neuters. You know, every animal that leaves the shelter has been spayed or neutered. If we're able to do that in-house, and right now we have commitments from veterinarians who said that they will come in and do that for free if we have a space to do it. So that saves us a lot of money that can go towards other operating costs. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this, but I think it's on us to be able to fundraise those to make sure that we can do it. That doesn't include adding any more city money if we can help it.
Anyone else?
Just want to make sure the council understands. So according to the consultants work, that we understand it, someone will ask, is it cheaper to renovate than build new? And the combination, you've concluded it is cheaper to take this building, renovate it, and add the new addition than it would be to build the building from scratch. Am I not correct?
That is correct. Based on our understanding of the purchase price, you guys are getting this at a good rate. And in fact, the city is then saving dollars by not building a new building for the same size. Correct.
Amber or Gloria, any other questions?
Not for me,
Okay.
no.
Brahman, any questions?
I don't think I have any, no, thank you.
Anita?
No, thanks.
Just a couple, thanks for coming out tonight.
Sure.
So we talked about the opportunities for expansion from a footprint perspective. So from the building itself, in terms of its structural capacity for expansion, any concerns we should know about in terms of limitations the building itself would have for expansion?
The building itself, its biggest limitation is that it's a pre-engineered Morton building structure. And as a result, we knowingly and in our planning process know that there's not the ability to put really rooftop equipment on it. The existing roof structure can't support new equipment on the roof. So we're planning for ground mounted equipment, things such as that. That is really its probably biggest limitation. As far as additions being able to construct it next to it and onto it, there would not be any concerns associated with that. It is really, with most pre-engineered buildings, the roof capacities to hold mechanical equipment.
Could you put solar panels on it, or we have to inside?
That should not be an issue. We would need to confirm, but those are typically lightweight elements. I'm talking more a 2,000-pound air handler or something like that on the roof.
And then, and I'm very supportive of this, but I'm just curious, you're sort of an interesting person because of your background. We're looking at 10,800 square feet. Could you give us a sense that for a city our size, right? And I suppose this is going to vary, but are there any kinds of rules of thumb for a city our size in terms of the approximate size of an animal shelter?
I'm going to let Scott, who's online here, jump in just a moment. For us, it's a lot more about looking at your intake numbers and what you guys have been showing. And we've got great intake numbers over the last 5 years. You guys are a unique community with a university setting, also with the fact that you have a veterinary college associated with that. So you're unique in just the amount of animal population that is within the city of Ames. So I think it would be difficult to pinpoint another community that would be similar. But what we've been able to do is look at the last 5 years of data and trend that on your intakes for your dog and your cat population to understand how that's been trending. What we're going to want to also do is look at the city's growth goals and be able to put that on a trend line as well so that we can start to understand what those intake numbers may look like.
So this is the first I've heard of this. So are our intake numbers significantly different than other communities our size?
Scott, can you, if you're online, can you speak a little bit of that to your other experiences across the nation?
Yes, I can. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, Scott.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. I'm in Connecticut where it's much warmer than Iowa. I think we're 19 degrees here.
Oof.
I think you have 0 there. And thank you to the council for having us help out. Just by way of introduction, I'm a professional engineer licensed in Iowa, and I own an architecture and engineering firm that designs animal shelters and veterinary hospitals exclusively. That's all we do. In the case of we did look at those numbers from Ron, the director of the shelter. We looked at both the 5-year history, as Brett alluded to. We also looked at a 12-month history from 2024, which we do regularly with our shelters, and look for seasonal effects. You do have some seasonal increases in the summer with dogs and cats, which is pretty common. And we do look at the development of growth in projecting future requirements. For this case, as Brett alluded to, the building itself is usable. That's a common, we have many projects where we use existing buildings, but in and of itself, it is too small to really put a proper shelter in place. The RFP had some projections for dog and cat enclosures, which we actually found were a little bit high. So we ended up at an intermediate. We did floor plans for, we actually did 3 full floor plans, one that met the RFP requirements, one that tried to, as the chief alluded to, tried to fit a shelter in the existing building, which was just really required eliminating a lot of necessary functions. And then one that was kind of intermediate.
Hey, Scott, real quick, Scott, real quick, but just for the council's time, can you speak to the question of your experience of shelter sizes, and if it's possible to speak to it, as it relates to a community the size of Ames and potentially with kind of a university element that's inside of that? Do you have any comparables, or how would you note that? Is that possible to do?
Yeah, the existence of the university is not a major factor in this. Most of the growth in sheltering is based on residential population and that growth. In the Midwest, we see relatively, I don't want to say zero. It's not zero, but it's predictable and it's not excessive growth. Just by comparison, we're doing a shelter in Henderson, Nevada, which is right outside of Las Vegas, and they're projecting a 30% population growth over the next 5 to 10 years. That's extremely significant, and the incidence of both surrenders of animals as well as adoptions will scale proportionately with the growth of the population. I would say in the Midwest, we're used to more of a maybe 5 to 10% growth over a 10-year period. And in the addition, we're very preliminary at this point, but in what we've been looking at, that would anticipate the current needs plus about 10%.
And so this is really helpful to have your expertise. So this shelter will certainly take care of us for the near future. Based on trend lines, is it possible to say this is going to get us out 20 years, 30 years? Is that possible to say that?
That's what we should be able to do once we get to a final planning module to show the number of kennel and spaces that we have, as we look at also your growth patterns, both backwards as well as forward future. The other thing I would like to point out is 2 different things. One element that we are looking to do within this shelter is provide in some locations kennel spaces that are double-sided. It's becoming more of a standard. It's part of future upcoming guidelines. And what that starts to do is build in some additional relief so that when you get to a month of maybe high animal intake, you've got some additional ways to split spaces and build in that capacity, so that your first goal isn't that, oh, the shelter is full. It's got some cushion and it's got some ways to give. That's one. The second element is that this plan is not just going to be a static plan. Our goal is to set this up so that you have the ability in the future, if needed, to increase its size. Not that we're planning on that it has to happen, but what do we do day one that works for you now with some capacity that if you see growth, you can put a future addition on 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Well, that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
We can't just be planning for what takes care of the current needs. We have to think long-term. Final question. I was looking around at model animal shelters, and give us 1 or 2 that you think are, just to give us a sense from your perspective, that are helpful model animal shelters to look at, just to give us a sense of what this could look like?
I mean, in the area, I would say the ARL that is up in Ankeny, that does have some large animal components that we're not talking about here today, I would say, as well as the city of Des Moines that's over off of Southeast 14th Street. I do believe they were a little bit more tied down with some budgetary items, so they did have to kind of shrink some elements. So I think they've got a plan for future growth that can happen over there as well. Those would at least be two local ones.
I think the other thing that we're looking at during this planning process is to make sure we have some flexible areas inside the shelter. You know, we have, as we talked about, some increases that happen in the summertime. We also have the occasional hoarding case. So we can't build a shelter that can, you know, be ready for 40 cats in a hoarding case 24/7. We just can't do that. So we have to have areas that are flexible within the shelter where when we have a larger influx for a short period of time, we're able to utilize those areas. The other thing, you know, I know that we're going from a shelter that's pretty small. We're talking about something that's much larger. Part of the reason for that is we don't have the air handling system in the current shelter that is anywhere near appropriate for what we're doing down there. So we have to have areas that are segregated so we don't have those diseases that run through the entire shelter, which has been a problem for us in the past. So that's part of the issue is you have areas where you're segregating the populations and segregating the air handling systems so that we're not mixing the air inside the shelter. And that's part of the reason for the size as well, as those are really best practices. When we have one of those incidents, which we've had, it's a lot of staff time, it's a lot of vet care, and it's a lot of expense when one of those happens. So we can avoid it. That also helps our operating costs when we're not fighting the disease that runs through the whole place.
Great, thanks for those answers.
Sure thing.
Rachel?
I don't think I have any questions.
Okay. I have to say that either Ron's been a magician, but just for the community's point of view, we're talking about 4 times the size almost, aren't we, now of a shelter? 3 or 4 times. So can you just comment why programmatically there's that much? Because it's, you know, turning into a significant, and thankfully the community has really risen to the occasion. But we don't have unlimited resources. And so I'm just curious, can you just give us some, insight into that? Because I think it's a question that's probably going to come up from the community when we start investing in that. And I don't think anyone wants to go out there and say that, this room is bigger than my, house. Why is it housing X number of animals? I mean, you and Scott have been hired because of your expertise. So like I said, either Ron's been a musician and his incredible volunteers that are just passionate about it, but help us understand that, if you would, put it in context.
Sure. I would say it falls into probably 3 different categories. And it's really associated with the program of what we're trying to serve. First, it's going to be your animal spaces. Right now, the number of animal spaces, Ron, 14 dog kennels and 42 cat kennels. Is that right? Slightly off? Right. So we've got 14 single-sided dog runs, 42 cat, and we're seeing an average kind of on the low end of about 60 cats, pushing upwards of 70, 80. So we're trying to understand what the right size is. So you're seeing well over a doubling there. On the dog side, we have 14. We're pushing between 16 to 31 at any given month. So we need to try to understand where the right size of that is, but making those so that you can address the flexibility or the large volume that you may receive, as the chief noted. The size of the kennels themselves are being asked to be larger per state guidelines than what you currently have. And we're also looking at trying to make the facility set up so that, likely not if, but when ASV guidelines come into place, you guys don't look at us and say, these guidelines were adopted, we don't comply, how do we handle that? So we're trying to balance that in there.
You know what ASV means, but I'm afraid I don't.
Association of Shelter Veterinarians. Right.
Which is,
Which is a national standard that I believe about 2/3 of the states have currently adopted across the country. So it's slowly moving in to various different states. And at that point, it's like, this shall be mandated. The other element then is our exotics. The current shelters does not have space for exotics and other animals. And then you work into that some of the isolation and separation that is best practice that we need to have. So that's for the animal side of things. Then we work into the public side, from reception, multi-purpose space, volunteer space. None of that currently occurs in the shelter, but you are still getting phenomenal results out of everybody that's working without those spaces to truly support those people and turn over the animal population you have. Lastly, but not least, it's your wonderful staff, for your animal control officers, all your team members that are working day in and day out. Lack of break room, restroom space, locker room space. So you add those basic programmatic elements with circulation and mechanical systems, and we end up at a size that we try to control and manage the city's budget, my taxpayer dollars, all of that in the best way that we can. We will be fully transparent on the size and the reason behind all of that, but those elements itself make this process not additive, but a little bit more of a multiplication.
so what I'm hearing you say is that if you were to design a brand new facility, not trying to use an existing facility, would you come up with the same amount of square footage, or would you feel less because you actually could have more efficiencies?
I would say the comment I made earlier in the conversation, I think the existing facility based on its shape is about 2 to 3% inefficient. So I think we would gain that slightly, but the value that you're getting based on the good value of purchasing this property is greatly outweighing that. And the city is well ahead there.
Okay. You mentioned it's a pre-engineered metal building, and the roof is 35 years old, or 30 years old, I think.
Right.
It is. It was built in 95. As you may or may not be aware, city budgets are getting tighter and tighter. And I'm just wondering what you have included in your budgets to ensure that we won't have a $250,000, $500,000 capital improvement plan for a roof, windows, exterior walls, doors, whatever. Because at least in my experience serving on council is that money's pretty short, and this is probably a one-shot, deal, and we want to basically have it be self-sufficient. So can you comment on that?
Sure. As it relates to the building shell itself, it seems to be in good watertight condition. The fact that a majority of that is masonry construction is, a 50, 60 plus year building.
It's masonry veneer. It's not masonry exterior walls, though, right?
Full white masonry, correct.
On the outside?
On the outside, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep. I would say, as we talked about what makes this building acceptable, site, parking, utilities, building structure, and we said the interior really needs to be removed to make it be proper. Just to your point, it's the exterior skin that we're going to have to continue to look at and understand if we in fact put an addition on this building. How do we blend those two things aesthetically, but also for the long-term function of that? We're going to need to look at that piece. Right now, the budget that we have, those dollars do include some exterior renovations to it, but we're going to have to be looking at those as we're going through the design process. A building like this, I won't get into details much, but there's multiple options for overlay all the way down to a full reskin to get us a proper system there.
Well, with the exterior masonry with dual white, that's different than just a masonry veneer on a metal stud that's going to be more flexible and chance of cracking and whatever. Honestly, my biggest concern for the city standpoint is that we get this all done, and in 5 years, they say, you got to budget $250,000 to $500,000 to basically do the roof, which is disruptive for the animals. It's going to add a lot of costs. You got to find ways to budget it. And so, but that is not included in your budget in terms of basically going over that with a single ply insulation and single ply membrane.
So our square foot cost that we put to the renovation as well as the new addition does include exterior costs. It's not a huge amount of dollars in there, but we've got the ability to work through those numbers as we start evaluating the overall size of everything. We will need to keep that in mind as a line item throughout. No different than possibly exterior doors, hardware, things like that as we start to change up the physical workings on the interior of the building.
And the reason I'm asking the detailed questions because you're purchasing an existing building and it affects the budget.
Right.
And so getting to the budget, it sounds like the total budget could be somewhere in the $7 to $7.5 million. I mean, this is what we have available to spend. Your budget that we're giving you essentially.
Yes.
And you say it's $7 million plus or minus $760,000. So how comfortable is your team with a cap being put on it and saying, we don't have any more? I don't think we have a lot of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
You sat through a meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. But there's lots of needs for capital, and the capital in Des Moines is seeing that we're potentially going to start tightening the purse strings.
Right.
So what's your comfort level? Because I know you're at a very high level.
Right.
But I just want to go on record. I don't think our council is willing to go ahead and say, oh, well, it's $8.5, $9 million. We'll go ahead and do it and find the money. So I just want to make sure, following this plan, that you are very comfortable that if you're at $7 to $7.5 million tops, that isn't achievable, because otherwise we're going to have some conversations on what we're going to start doing, to trim.
Right. No, based on our design schedule and based on when we would anticipate this potentially going out for construction, we're seeing these kind of prices where we're currently under that right now. So I feel like we've got a cushion right now in our square foot costs that lead to our overall budget for both of these items. Pending, 30% inflation, tariffs, things like that. Those are probably the unknowns. But outside of that, what we've seen for construction costs here over the last 18 months, those numbers are in alignment with that, with inflation included for when we'd be putting this out to bid. So long story short, we're comfortable with where those numbers are.
The only request I would have, Chief, is that I think you absolutely have to look at having a complete overlay on that. I don't think a 30-year metal roof is going to have another 15, 20 years life. I think it's going to start leaking, and when you're starting to do work, plumbing vents going through the roof, people can probably be walking on that. I hate to say it, but my guess is it may be watertight now, but it may not be watertight when you're all done. And nothing's worse than having a brand new building and all of a sudden you start having leaks, and then you got to find money. So I would just think it needs to be really programmed in, and maybe potentially bid as an alternate. But I think it's just being a good steward of our investments and making sure the exterior shells, so we can walk away and say, because Ron, you've lived in a building that we have basically, begged, borrowed steel. We just want to basically be done with that and provide a great facility for, the first of all the volunteers, but also our, the animal friends and our community. So, last question: is there going to be an indoor? Is there going to be a garage, or how does when you bring animals in, or is it always going to be vehicles or outside? What's a normal standard for an animal shelter?
It'd be nice to have a sally port. I think that's one of the contingencies, depending on how we do on fundraising. So we've looked at a couple of different designs that do include a sally port kind of garage area. But I think that may be one of the last things that we would fund, because we can do without it. It'd be nice to have. Yeah. And just for the record, we haven't stolen anything for the shelter.
You what?
Begged and borrowed, yes, but not the last one.
All right, just
begged and borrowed, absolutely. But nice.
Oh, I said that. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was a very wrong implication. Thank you very much. So, anyway. All right.
I had just one minor question. We haven't seen any pictures of this additional dog area. So would there be some, I was flipping through some animal shelter pictures, and some of them will have dog runs. Is that sort of the thing that you're contemplating with this additional dog area?
There'll be both. So the addition will have the dog inside kennels, and then there'll be access to outside areas so the dogs can get outside as well. Is that what you're asking?
It is.
Yeah. Yep. There'll be both.
Thanks.
And at this point, they are initially high level planned on the south side of the building.
Okay.
Kind of away from the parking lot side. It also works well with obviously the southern exposure. Right.
And we'll come back at some point before this goes out to bid, kind of show all the spaces.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You can get a better picture of what it looks like. But we're pretty high level now, and we really got to drill down on what we actually need.
Yep, thanks.
So Brett, you're comfortable putting in your contract if on the basis that the chief and company wants it to continue with Envision, an absolute not to exceed total project costs, including all fees, contingency, everything, $7.5 million in delivering a project, including, a roof and exterior on the project. Because I think that this is what council did on the aquatic center, and it came in significantly under budget. I think everyone got the message that we only had so much money to spend, and maybe I'd better ask a question now than all of a sudden having bids come back and say, oh, we're over budget. Well, that's not our problem.
No, absolutely.
It's a design team problem, because you got to go back and redesign it to make sure that it comes under budget.
No, absolutely. We've been talking about this as a team already, that we want to get the best value for the city and for the shelter. So that will likely include a final design that comes in front of the council for base bid, and then also working in a number of alternates, because at least right now we're seeing good competitive bids.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have the ability to base bid that and also get a few of these additional elements, maybe a Sally port, something like that, we want the opportunity to be able to do that. So yes, we are comfortable with that.
All right, good. All right. If there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion on one of the alternatives.
I'd move
I'd move alternative one.
Which is moved by Betcher, second by Corriere, which is accept the report, approve the purchase of property located at 2715 Dayton Avenue in the amount of $1.1 million. Roll call.
Betcher.
Aye.
Edie Hansen.
Aye.
Rollins.
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Thornton.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Very good. So I just make a few closing comments here. Is that, first of all, I just think it's remarkable. We need to celebrate our community, people coming together to fund this development. We wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't the community really, rallying. And so in this motion, the city just approved providing approximately $3 million in funding, but we anticipate unbelievably an additional $4.5 million of private funding. And to kick it off, it's my understanding that an anonymous gift of $3 million, a single gift of $3 million has been pledged towards or committed to this. And just on behalf of council, I want to thank this donor. They prefer to remain anonymous, but what an investment, what a generous, spirit, and what an important, community betterment project. So now we have another $1.5 million, to raise. And I believe, what I've been told, that that's an achievable amount, which is fantastic. But money is important, but really what's more important, Ron, I just want to thank you and your volunteers. Where are they tonight, by the way? I didn't see anyone. I thought they'd be all here in force. There you go. All right. But anyway, but just to hear that over 7,000 volunteer hours a year, are done. I mean, I think that's because of your leadership, because of people's caring about animals. But I want to just, on behalf of council and the community, thank you, for what you're doing. And this new facility is going to be fantastic. Brett just guaranteed it. But just place to adopt a pet, for our volunteers to work, and city staff to maintain the shelter. Not the least, but more importantly, our all of our animal friends, and having a facility it deserves. So thank you for the quick turnaround. I know it was a short short time frame. But I'm just overwhelmed to hear that someone's matched what the city's putting in a single gift, and then the potential to raise more. And I think if people are interested, if someone's watching and they're interested in donating, who would they contact? Will they contact you, Chief, or Steve, or who they talk to? It gives me ideas. We won't have a telethon, but just
Right now, it's probably Ron. And we'll be, now that this is done, we're going to start in earnest tomorrow with the rest of the fundraising. And so we'll be putting out some more information, ways to donate, donate buttons to click, those kind of things. So we'll make it easier for people that want to be a part of this new shelter.
That's a good point, is that we believe we can raise it, but if we can't, that means your budget is going to be lower.
Yeah,
So how are you thinking about that, Brett?
we need to dig into the numbers to understand what we are working with as what's guaranteed at this point, and then again work on that from a phasing standpoint. Again, we go through various phases here of schematic design, design development, and construction documents. And for those that aren't familiar with that, it's really early conceptual design where we're going to understand kind of the overall basic needs and the general layout. That'll take a number of months here when we get through design development. In that, we'll hopefully have a better sense of where our funding sits because we're getting closer to putting this out to bid. So at that point, we'll have a better sense of our funding. And in that design development phase, we'll really lock in what our base bid is and what we think our maybe funding stretch goal is, something like that, so that we can be including these additions. I'm not hearing anybody have concerns with alternates for different parts of the project, but we'll have to make sure that it is additive, that if one of these alternates does not move forward, Ron's not mad at me that we, are missing a major component. So we've got to be smart about what elements are in the base bid and what would be additional.
Well, to your point, you got to marry that with what the anticipated giving is. And if we're at $7 million, you're more comfortable with the X, Y, and Z. Maybe you can add A, B, and C if you get to $7.5 million. But the point is, we got to have some safety valves. Last thing you want to do is take bids and find out, we can't award it. It's just over budget, and you got to redesign it and rebid it essentially. So anyway. All right, Chief, Corey, thank you. Ron, thanks for coming. Brett, pleasure meeting you. And
thanks all.
With that, any closing comments? Otherwise, I think we're done with this one. All right. Thank you. With that, we'll go to council comments. Gloria, anything for you tonight?
I just want to second everything that you said, Mayor, about our wonderful volunteers and thanking the folks who are donating to this project.
Yep. Amber?
Nothing for me.
Thanks. Bronwyn?
Nothing for me.
Ethan?
Just a reminder that on Friday, 11:30, we will have a workshop on communications with the Honorable Sharon Weston Broom. So hope that all those that are available will come back to City Hall, 11:30 Friday.
Jim?
So we don't say thank you enough. The city staff and emergency workers and public works people who've been out in this incredibly challenging weather. I don't know if there's a way, Steve, to say thank you to your team who are getting it done. We appreciate. We have great roads because of the work that they do. And I stopped by a place where we had a water main break on Saturday and talked with the guys who were there working. And it's tough conditions.
Oh, boy.
And so sometimes we can take these people for granted. And so thank you to our city staff.
Good point.
And there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now with cuts in the federal budget. I've been asked a number of times what keeps me up at night. And one of the things that keeps me up at night with respect to a city of Ames is that we have benefited from a lot of government dollars, state and federal dollars, but I've always been concerned about a major drawdown in those dollars. And I'm very concerned of the way in which our federal government is going about these cuts and how it will impact our community. So for those people who are federal employees, we are hoping, watching all of this and just hoping that we'll come out of this okay. But there's a lot of uncertainty in this community for people work for the federal government. So I don't have any other comments. Just I hope that this process goes well and we come out of this okay.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, two very exciting projects tonight. I think it was very exciting, and I hope the community takes notice of this and also is, happy about these moving forward.
All right, very good. Entertain motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
All right, we are adjourned. Have a good evening.